The particular volume that I'm going to read from, although I might read one or two from this older one, is a group of poems that I wrote over 40 years. The first ones were written 74, 75, 76, something like that. And the newest one was written in 2013. They are semi-autobiographical, which means I allow myself to lie if it makes a better poem. And but the facts are not necessarily the facts all the time, but the truth is always the truth. And at least as I saw it while I was writing them, the thread that holds them together is an autobiography of my lifelong conversation with nature. That's basically, if you want to ask, you're not supposed to ask poets what's it about, but if you want to ask what it's about, that's what it's about. And I have written other kinds of poems. Linda, my lovely bride, who is not normally into poetry, this is her favorite because it's more accessible. Some of the things I write, when I give it to her for her to give her eye and ear to, she'll write, huh? That didn't happen too often in this volume. So. Fatherhood. There was the valley, the Youghiogheny cutting through rounded mountains, the red clay my father dug with pickaxe and shovel to force a home from the grudging hillside. The time was new, the clay dark red with iron, the wind warm enough for summer, but not so hot you'd think of death. My father grunted with each heft and swing. He sculpted that clay with the same careful touch he used when he etched our busts in redwood. He showed me the meaning of the red clay, the river in the valley cleft, the rounded mountains. He showed me the tracks of the deer, the shy brown flash of doe between green undergrowth. He showed me how to find wild onions by their leaves, and how to recognize wild cherry trees by their black bark and sweet sap. And with the sunburnt sweat of his rippling back, and with each heft and swing, he showed me how to cut a home from a red hillside. So, with a shaping word, I have tried to hew a human place from high sun and the hunger within the world's rich clay. So hence, memories in clay. I grew up in the Pittsburgh area, Appalachians, here it's Appalachians, mountains, and we had lots of red clay, and the red clay over time became red shale, which we called red dog. And the little shotgun home that my dad doubled the size of, this is it now, not as it was then, the back part of it he literally dug out by hand so he could add a room and patio in the back, and that was the memory that I drew from this. But it's also about the idea of using language to make the world more human and to make help us as human beings to better understand the world. And so I put that near the beginning because I thought that was a good place to start, as it was a place for me to start literally. Prelude Inspirited. In the creek and in the mountain once believed themselves a spirit, each a spirit to a place, linked to a pair of eyes and to the ears that could hear the spirit's voice. Count the singular moments of a life, and each will have a place in spirit. So back to each place in body, the spirit likely is dispersed. But go back in mind, the spirit lives. He might first have heard the spirit in his father's voice, walking the woods together, his father's hand bringing wild carrot and onion from the soil and showing deer and trees. On a hillside in Pennsylvania, by a creek, the boy might first have heard the voices, or not knowing they were his voices, may have imagined them in sleep. Under any rock of memory, within those certain books he read while cracking from his prior skins, the boy might understand in moments that his life is just such spirits. He might have felt his flesh writhing in the small copse of trees by the railroad tracks behind the junior high, where the fire circle and the clearing told of tramps. He might have heard his skull breaking open when he oared around the river bend to find the open sewer foaming white froth into the bay, metal rich in stench from the assembly plant. But no matter what voices he thought he heard, or what spirit he thought he saw in the soil, the water, the trees, it was some blood within himself that gave the whole thing song. In the creek and in the mountain, each a spirit to a place, linked to his eyes and to his ears and to his voice, that he would be the voice, and nothing more than that. I believe in stealing from everybody when I write, and this poem probably has, I didn't maybe realize it at the time, but there's a lot of Wordsworth here, and the idea that every place has a spirit to it, and the relationship between the human and that place. If you do value the world and ecology, it's troubling to see our negative imprint on the world. And so this was a case where I came around a corner and saw raw sewage and pollution being pumped right into the water that I swam in sometimes. And more than that, of course, but that original sin, I guess you could say. In Pennsylvania, in McKeesport. In Pennsylvania, in McKeesport, the boy grew up amid coal and steel, smoke and sound. Winter, snow fell mingled with coal dust. Summer, the air was acrid with fumes. Whistles sounded each day. Coal barges chugged the river, herded by white tugs which churned brown water into beards of foam. The tugs shrieked shrill steam, as did bleeding black trains that coughed and sang along the steel rails beside the river. At the bottom of the eastern hill, where the red brick street met the highway, a dark steel mill blasted the night sky red, and smoked and whistled the day into shifts, echoing across the valley. The soil glistened with glass beads and slivers of shining glass, and the frozen black bubbles of slag cast from the mill along the ridges above the river, scabs of slag dark against the green. The boy wore slag needles in his hands and knees from clambering the slopes. Crystal, the sliver could not be seen within flesh, except in the right angle of sunlight. Sometimes he had to keep the glass hidden in his flesh until it worked itself free in its own time. Even the creek and Red Dog, red clay gone stone, seemed alive with mineral meaning. In western Pennsylvania hills, where shining anthracite and dull bituminous were words he'd learned to spell, and black stones were how he came to know incarnate darkness. His father worked the still, welding it in bright sparks, flash burning his eyes. His mother carried the coal from the coal bin in the basement to the rumbling furnace, and the boy wore coal dust in his hair and on his face and hands like minstrel makeup, while he waited the deep glass needles in his flesh to resurface like diamonds from the heat and power of the wounded earth. Should I ever actually become famous, which is not likely, but you never know, the minstrel makeup is probably something a biographer will never figure out. But one of my most humiliating experiences as a child, I must have been 8 or 9, in the Cub Scouts. And the all-white Cub Scouts thought it would be fascinating and fun if we dressed up and did a minstrel show with full blackface. And I did not have a highly developed racial conscience. That wasn't I did not grow up with overt prejudice, but if you grow up in this country, you grow up with some. But I just did not like that at all, and I soon after, despite being a Weeblo, quit and did not continue as a Boy Scout. And plus I was very shy and did not like being on stage. But wearing the blackface and everything, it just seemed really stupid, I guess is the way I would have put it at the time as a kid.
I have a question.
Yes.
Was that poem autobiographical? Were your parents in the steel industry?
My dad worked for Kelsey Hayes, which took the steel from the steel plants and made brakes and wheels for the auto industry. And he started as a laborer welder. And in those days you could, with a high school degree. He was the only one in his family finish high school, as my mother was the only one of 13, 7 in my dad's, 13 my mother's, to finish high school. After the Navy in World War II, he got a job as a laborer welder, but was able to work over the years up to being a plant superintendent, which you can't do nowadays without a degree. A little pitch for Germana. And so yeah, he was in that business, and we moved to Michigan, which is the second part of this book, because the plant moved and they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Stay and be laid off, or go, we'll pay your way and promote you. So we ended up in the Detroit area. My mother was a nurse. She cleaned houses for a living for 5 years, and then the nurse cadet program of World War II. There was no financial aid back then. That was the only federal kind of program to go to post-secondary, and she became an RN through that. So yeah, it's pretty accurate. Most of the facts are there. The sweetness of color. Honeybees hummed in and out of the sweet grapevines which grew up the trellis and overhead like a green blossomed tunnel. The boy walked through, hearing the dangerous hum of the bees which could sting him into illness, looking at the sun in fragments through the thick leaves, feeling the heat even here under green shade. His sister called to him, and Eddie's freckled face and red hair peered from the end of the tunnel. There was a small mewing he could just hear below the buzz. At the end of the tunnel, under dark leaves, the golden tabby lay, squeezing out small gooey bits of colored fur, one after another. She would lick each clean, transforming it into a closed-eyed kitten, even while she strained to push the next from within her. The boy knelt as if praying. Each kitten grew from inside the cat. He did not move, did not notice when the sun moved far enough to stab down from the end of the tunnel and blind him. His sister sat with their small hands clutched together. Eddie stood aside, proud as a midget carnival barker. At last the tabby seemed done. No more impossible tiny duplicates of herself in different colors. The boy picked up one, as golden as its mother. He felt it suckling his thumb and lay it down beside her. He walked home in silence while beside him his sister danced and chattered, telling him what he had seen. 2 days later, Sunday, 3 of the 7 kittens had died. The tabby did not seem to notice. How do you learn empathy? Do you learn empathy? Is it given to you? Both? Grendel. When his stone-shaped head first poked over the edge of the hill where the red brick curved downwards towards Walnut Street, they could hear him talking out loud to himself, and the boys would run and hide behind the jagger bushes beside the woods. They couldn't understand his guttural noises, his head nods and shakes, his awkward gestures as he swaggered up the hill, waddling under the weight of the green and white Pittsburgh press bag filled with daily newspapers. So when he passed, the older boys would throw crab apples. "Oh, stop," he'd shout, then step towards a glimpse of red or blonde hair snickering among green leaves, and the boys would scatter, laughing in fright and anger at his ugly forehead and thick arms. From door to door he'd teeter, as if his massive head were pulling him steadily groundward, and only these sudden steps to right or left and staggering lurch kept him from tumbling over. At each house he'd pause on porch to drop a paper and grunt some incantation. The adults of the neighborhood seemed not to notice or mocked him as their children did when his back was turned, swaying their own heads like angry elephants, then laughing in uncomfortable superiority. They mouthed his sounds as if they knew the words. From inside his home, the boy would wait in itching fear to hear the murmuring voice. The boy knew there was power in this ugly head and big hands, and not merely the power of size or clumsy strength, something many men had, but not other power. For when the boy ran home from the hillside and cowered behind the door to hear the grunting guttural of the newspaper man, he carried within dark dreams of himself as a clumsy, fat-bellied, t-shirted, large-headed child-man monster teetering with a different face. He was the one carrying newspapers. He was the one swaying under the eyes of strangers. He was the one struck by apples and laughter, able only to grunt out mouth sounds and swagger a massive skull back down the hill to the cave by the river from which he'd crawled.
Question for you. What was happening in that story? Who's carrying the newspapers?
It was a newspaper man back when they walked, and he had some kind of mental disability. Don't really remember exactly what he looks like, but I'm guessing it probably was genetic because of he did have a very large, somewhat misshapen head, and but I don't really know. And he delivered the newspapers for a while, and this is basically my uncomfortable participation, either mostly by silence in the teasing of him and the mocking of him, but complicit nonetheless, and trying to understand the guilt that I felt from that.
Where was this, in McKeesport?
Yeah. I lived on 36th Street, which is still red brick.
Right.
And it was a great place to grow up because we had it was a city, 75,000 at the time, and we played stickball and kicked the can and all this, and could go down the hill to Walnut Street and take the bus downtown to go to the movie theater and see bad 50s sci-fi.
Around World War I.
A very, very dear friend of mine. And but our yard ended, as it still does, in the woods. So I could go and play in the woods, and so I had country city life.
There were two papers delivered in those days, wasn't there? Post-Gazette and
Yeah.
Press.
Yeah. And I don't remember if he did both, because I think one was morning, one was afternoon. And he might have done one and not the other. I picked Pittsburgh Press. I couldn't really remember.
This is the afternoon kind of with one and-
Yeah.
Interesting.
On days when it's like summertime when I was home. Skip to Michigan, the second section.
May I ask you a question
Sure.
about Pennsylvania first?
Sure.
So when you were growing up, did you feel like you were kind of in the willywags, that you wanted to be in Pittsburgh, say, or Philadelphia, or did you
Didn't think about it.
just that was just
This was the world, center of the world, and this is where we lived. And it's a neighborhood of immigrants and children of immigrants and grandchildren of immigrants, and it just was. Didn't think about it.
And you on the other side, did you think about how, in a way, idyllic it was? You know,
Well, it wasn't always idyllic. I mean, I was a kid, and I got teased by the gang and bullied occasionally, and in the earlier poem, speaking of the image of the snake, shedding its skins as you go through different stages of life, and of course the older you get, in that terrible time between 8 years old and 15, 18, for some people older, it wasn't always idyllic, but and I try to be true to that although there's another volume of more autobiographical poems that's more about family and that rather than nature, that gets into some of the darker aspects of being a human and so on. But mostly I had a lot of fun. I liked school. I was weird. When I talk about leadership, that I did not grow up thinking I was a leader. I was called the lone wolf. When I wasn't hanging with the guys, I was by myself, and I liked that. I liked hiking in the woods by myself. But we played a lot of games, had a lot of fun. So. Shouting run into the brain. In early October, when only those leaves that always leaved first and lost first were changing, like the silver maple by the highway, he went behind the house to burn trash in the incinerator, and found his dog running madly while lying on his side. It was the only dog of his 13 years. Now it ran, its eyes sealed, its muscles answering the madness as in a dream. The boy called out the dog's name, trying to wake it from its dream running. The signals within the dog still shouted run, and muscles still obeyed. His father, whose stone face the boy could never read, except in anger, told him, "Get away," and gently gathered the dog in his arms. The tanned muscles of his father's jaw tightened. His eyes grew distant as he placed the running mad dog in black country sedan, closed the tailgate. "Get away," his father said again. The boy ran to the highway, climbed the yellowing silver maple there, till he got to the first wide fork, then sat, his arms embracing the black, rough bark, as if it were his father. He sat there in the crotch of the tree, his own legs trembling. He kept his back to the dirt road, down which he heard the black car rippling its tires across gravel. In his sealed eyes, the boy saw his dog still running, its toenails scratching the red paint of the car interior as his father drove death's dark signals to a distance. The boy sat still till he heard silence. He opened his eyes to the leaves around him, some still green, some already curled and brown, most brilliantly yellow in October. The air was warm enough. He didn't need his jacket. There was no wind. He felt the madness of his legs, which trembled, shouting "run" into his brain. I was probably a pretty morbid kid. It's another poem about me collecting dead animals that I'd find. I had a graveyard, dead snakes, dead rabbits, all kinds of animals that I planted there. I did not become a mortician. I suppose I had a good early preparation for it, but the consciousness of the man and the boy come together in the poem because at the time I was really angry at my dad. And he and I had a very difficult relationship. I was the only son, the eldest son of the favorite son of my grandmother who ran the family. And my dad was, that generation where you did not express emotions unless it was anger. Men didn't do that. And, John Wayne was the ideal. And later in life, he and I were talking when we had come together and grown apart and then grown together and forgiven each other for being human, forgiven ourselves for being human. And we were talking about this incident, and he finally told me that the doctor diagnosed, brain cancer and put him down for the dog, and how hard it was for him to do that. And I talked about how when I had to, at the time we were talking, had to put my dog down, I realized that I had to be the dad now, and I had to be the one to make those hard decisions. And so the consciousness of the man and the boy kind of come together in that poem. Chasing loons. I used to hang out on Belleville Lake, suburb of Detroit. It was dammed up river, the Huron River. And a friend of mine had a ski boat. We go water skiing. But sometimes summertime, we take the boat out there and just drift. But we also chase loons. He clung to the slick bow of the speeding Sea Ray, the 110-horse Mercury roaring behind his wind-driven ears. The dancing bow thumped his chest against the beige fiberglass on each fall into wave trough. Cold spray splintered against his face. The loon flew just out of reach of his grasping right hand. Its clumsy flying reminded him of the joy and humiliation he felt when he wanted Anne. He laughed at the loon as he had been laughed at. He strained to reach the loon as the motorboat seemed ready to drive him into its flight. Suddenly the loon staggered right, faltered, then fell from the wind into the green April water. Ed throttled back, and the prop cavitated, gurgling and popping in white bubbles. They both looked at the water where the loon had fallen. It was stained with ripples, but there was nothing else. No feathers, just circles of absence. He thought the bird must have broken its heart in its shame and fear. He thought the bird must have died, falling from the wind. They idled the boat in circles, looking for the loon corpse. Ed finally turned the motor off and let the boat drift with the early dank wind, which stung the face, and remembered quietly the sound the engine had made. Suddenly, 100 feet away, downstream, towards the dam, the loon cry, mourning, no, the loon laughing, haunting, as it had been laughed before, as it would always be laughed, the same loon fallen from the wind, immortal, shameless, sudden, the same laugh in the morning. Anybody know birds? Loons do a great possum death. They'll pretend to die and crash into the water, and they can swim underwater for a long distance chasing fish. On the other hand, the loons are no longer on the lake, and I fear our chasing them was one of the reasons why. Stupid teenager. But we learn. Graduated from college in the dark ages in 1971, and I was going to become an English professor. But in reality, I knew I was going to be, as we used to say, a grad student at the University of Saigon, because my draft number was such that I would get drafted and shipped over there. When Nixon wound down the war, the doors opened, and even though I had a full ride scholarship to get a PhD, I decided that the only thing I knew I could do was to be good at school, and I wanted to know if I could be good at life. So I decided to postpone that career, and I went to Ann Arbor and got a minimum wage job as the first male record and sheet music girl. That was the actual title back in those days. It was record and sheet music girl. That was the title. And I did have long hair, so that part fit. But after working there for not quite a year, and after having planned a trip to Oregon with a group of friends, all 4 of them got married, got jobs, I decided I would hitchhike there. So I have, if you're interested, the map of the trip that I took, that I created recently. The third section is from 5 weeks that someone asked earlier what was best about the trip, and I can't, the trip. It was my first grad program. I learned as much in this trip about myself, about people, about the world, about nature. I learned as much about things as I did in college. And I like college, and I was good at it. But this is my first master's degree, I guess you could say. Waiting for fire. At the apex of roads, in the middle of prairie, asleep like a waiting prairie fire, he has abandoned the car streams for this dried, baked clay, this scrub brush, these sand fleas. For 2 nights he had not slept, trying to outwit his eyelids, until his eyes were hot and clumsy, as dry as Wyoming. The road at night was bloody with taillights. Mesas and crag-faced mountains shadowed the thin-starred darkness as he found rides with strangers in their dark cars. At dawn this day, he'd been emptied onto this prairie, unrolling from a dusty brown falcon into a sleeping bag thrown over a near-flat place to sleep. When he wakes, he wakens to a white sun. Every stone, every crack, every scar in the dry clay mapped into his dull flesh. 2 swigs of tepid, tinny water from the canvas-covered canteen, and he rises to the road again to hitch still further west, away from the concrete, the dry heat, away from the empty prairie within. Poetry nowadays, that most people write, is not the regular rhymed and rhythm poetry that you find in Hallmark cards or that you found in classic poetry. But if I can editorialize, too often people that write don't know their craft, and they have not learned how to use imagery, words, sounds. I might maybe go overboard because I was very much influenced by Dylan Thomas. I would love to sound like Dylan Thomas. I don't. I don't sound too bad, but Richard Burton and Dylan Thomas are sort of like the ideal. So I think you could hear a lot of the music that I like to put in there.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So did you keep a journal too? Because some of the descriptions and memories seem so clear.
It's burned into my brain, but I kept a little tiny book, and I simply wrote, and it's somewhere in a box in the basement, and I simply wrote down each day a few words that reminded me of what I did that day. Every day you'd meet multiple people, as people would pick you up and drop you off, or you would wake up in one habitat, and you'd hike higher and end up in a different habitat. As we age, the days go by faster, and one of the reasons is because every day seems the same as the day before. We lose that innocent ability to see everything afresh when we never meet the same person twice. Even those we live with and love are different every day. Is it Heraclitus? The river is always the same river, but it's never the same river, which is also kind of a Taoistic idea.
If your father had been taking you to ball games every week and having cookouts every weekend and bouncing you on his knee and been very warm and affectionate, do you think you would have become a writer?
Yeah. Yeah. I did not know until later in life my dad was a painter. He's a self-taught painter. My mother wrote poetry, humorous poetry mostly, but some serious. When she died a few years ago, the nursing department at Germanna did me the honor of taking one of her poems, and it's now in our pinning ceremony brochure, Ode to a Nurse. And when you write something like this, which is my Wordsworth's prelude kind of thing, you try to figure out where you came from. How did it happen? Was it fate? But I think I was injected with language at an early age. I wrote my first poem about birds flying when in 5th grade, I think it was. So, and my dad was, to my mind then, very disappointed in me because I didn't play the sports, and I was strikeout king. Of course, 5th grade they found out I was blind as a bat. No wonder I couldn't hit the ball. Later on, he told me that he was afraid of me. He said, "You're so smart that I was afraid of you." And I said, "But Dad, you're as smart as I am." And he said, "No." I said, "I think you're confusing educated with smart," because but he was smart in a different way. He could build a bookcase with tongue and groove, and he was smart with his hands. He was very right brain too. I paint with a camera and with words, and there are others that have talents to paint in other ways, but I don't. And but yeah,
You didn't have to suffer to become a poet.
no, I experienced the normal things that life brings to all of us, and all of our biographies ends the same way. But if I had to say, I've been very lucky and blessed in my life. So. This was one of the first ones published. I've had poems published from time to time. This is a slightly different version of it. Bend, Oregon, the 4th of July. Tall pines, bed needles beneath, ash below, rock precipice. He has come to an end of denials and flows with the cold stream of melting ice. He cuts deep with the rivulets. He molds crevices in mud. He tears with the falling water and leaps rapids of rock and time diving for the valley. Surrounded there by sorties of mosquitoes, water wrigglings of snakes, he drifts through swamps in lazy near stagnation to the waterfall and midair dances. He becomes mist. He powers the small generators. He runs to the city and becomes the river, suspends the swimming children and the sailboats hieing to the wind, and he reflects fireworks by night. He sleeps there one night beneath a park bench, unpoor hobo, awaiting the change to peacefulness and deep moving. Now, literally, I got lost in the Three Sisters area of Bend, Oregon, is what I was talking to you about earlier, because the trail that I was following, which was marked with snowmobile and trail markers that were 10, 12 feet up on the trees, and a map I had, disappeared under snow. It's July, but there was so much snow, I was walking on at least 10 feet of snow. So I had to just dead reckon, and I slept up in the middle of nowhere. Nobody knew where I was. I mean, I was an idiot. But the next day, I had to dead reckon down, and the map somehow got lost. I don't know. But I literally went downhill, following along a stream that went into a swamp, and I knew the road was on the other end of the swamp, so I had to walk through the swamp, and I could see the water snakes and so on around me, and then climb out, and then here I am, muddy and dripping on the side of the road. Someone actually picked me up. I wouldn't have picked me up, and took me into Bend, Oregon, which is on the bend of a river, and I did not know that it was the 4th of July. I'd completely lost track of time, because on a journey like this, time is timeless. And it was the only night you could sleep in the park without being hassled by the police. I did not know that. I hid under a park bench, didn't have to. And they had 4th of July celebration with fireworks, and the church had for $1.50, I think it was, you got a chicken dinner. A whole half of a chicken, baked beans, corn on the cob. I was in heaven, because I've been eating this freeze-dried stuff while hiking. So that's the literal truth. But it's also at a crisis point in the book where my identification with the natural world is such that I become the river, or the river becomes me. Time for probably a couple more.
Sam, you need to run the blender real quick.
All right. I'll see if I can find one that goes with blending. Fire away.
That's right.
As my heart is crushed. No.
There you go. Well, that's a good opportunity for me to thank the Griffin for allowing me to inflict poetry on all of you. I like ebooks. I have a Kindle. I like being able to highlight it and export the highlights and carry thousands of books. But I love books and bookstores. And I like being able to shop online. But where can you really go other than a library or bookstore to stumble on something that could change your life? So buy from the Griffin. Wisdom of the common grackle. They faked me out.
There's to your wisdom.
Well, that's an interesting thing. I am not as smart as the stuff that I write. I don't, it's a bizarre thing. You're in the middle of being human and going through a part of life where you're feel completely lost. and don't know what you're doing, and you're just getting up and going through the motions, and you write something and you read it and say, where did that come from? Because that's real smart. I wish I was that smart. And that's where you can believe in inspiration, the idea that something from outside of you uses you as an instrument to write. Clearly, you have to work your craft. If you don't work your craft, that whatever comes through comes out as trash. Might be inspired, but it's inspired trash. But, you know, I like to think I'm smart, but what I write has always been smarter than I was. Wisdom of the common grackle.
We're good. I've been told we're good.
He was instructed by the suddenness of grackles shot from the grass in black wings and green fluorescence. What could he learn that he had not already ignored? Yellow beads of eyes, bird shrieks, the bare tree limbs. He wore the sky in his eyes, except that he could not see it there. He saw instead the lead-colored clouds. Shivering, he breathed in cold January, held it inside against his ribs, and let it free in breath smoke. Learning. The bees, the birds for leaves in barren trees. Evergreens full of bird voices, not meaning anything. Mind wordless for the microsecond of his seeing. He took his lessons seriously and made his blood understand. Or he forgot. In dropping sky, snow downing, crystals melting on his upturned face, forgetting, he was the memory of what needed him. Sky lowering, trees singing in the sway, full bird voiced. Enough. Be wordless in the space that follows. Instantness of grackle, gray sky, evergreen bending over, snow.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say this book is kind of about your growth as a human being from, youth to kind of, college age and kind of your track across
It's part of
life,
it's part of the story. It's the story of my relationship with and conversation with nature in the natural world. There's, just as with any human being, there's lots of story paths, but that's this particular one.
What is the name of the other book about family?
Shades of Difficulty.
Okay.
That's the tentative title. It's assembled. I don't know if it's ready yet. And I'm still trying to get people to publish these things. So. We have time for two more? One short, one long, maybe? This one is for this lovely person sitting in front of me here. For Linda, near Gatlinburg, March 2006. Sitting on that sun-warmed rock, its slate broken by time and smoothed by rushing water, you smile into cold sunshine. In that smile, I see the younger woman you say you used to be. I see you as a steady stream, like this river from the Appalachians, always flowing towards the Gulf, always bringing cold mountains down towards the warm seas, always certain in my wayward stream. I am of Appalachians. I have to declaim this a little bit. So this is. I am of Appalachians, old mountains worn round and green by millennia of wind and water, born of Pennsylvania red clay and hilltops of black loam, slate and sandstone and hard-faced cuts made by men to highway through passes. I breathed coal dust, played with the bright glass in rough slag, and skipped red dog across creeks, cutting hands and knees, so the crystals from old smelt became my flesh, invisible clarity of ache, glistening in the right light. My dreams still flow of muddy Youghiogheny water, neither the flat Michigan plains of gray clay and brown sand, nor the white dunes of northern Florida filled with palms, bright azalea beside blue ocean, can displace the green mountains that enfold the creases of my brain, holograms of my youth of living slant on the side ways of the hills. Remountained now to Virginia and horizons of the Blue Ridge, I am becoming as old as Appalachian mountains, as hungry as cataracts and roaring creeks sluicing down mountain sides of spring melt. In my end, I return to what had made me, become as hard and black as anthracite, residual of all organic, latent of the all-consuming fire, to make me glassy slag entire, brilliant in the remnants of the hills. Thank you all.
Thank you.